But next, he's a rock star. He's a humanitarian. He's been to the heartland and all around the world, all in the name of love. One of Time Magazine's People of the Year. I predicted it. U2's Bono is next, right here in America's Newsroom. Keep it right here on Fox, the most powerful name in news. Welcome back to Heartland. Coming up, author Anne Rice tells me why she's turned from writing about vampires to writing about Jesus. And the amazing Kreskin says he knows what's in store for 2006. He's going to be here live. But first, my in-depth interview with Bono. He's one of the biggest rock stars in history. He's a tireless humanitarian. And now he's sharing the honor of being Time Magazine's 2005 Person of the Year with Bill and Melinda Gates. I sat down with a U2 frontman a while back, and we got down to the roots of his good work. Your name wasn't always Bono. One time it was Paul, and you were just a young man.
Paul is dead.
No, he's not. I mean, they
as
came
Paul
out
McCartney
and said,
used to say, Paul is dead.
Well, but when you were just a young boy, and now, you know, people think of you as a big star, but let's face it, there was a time when you had to search for your voice, and something must have driven you as a young man to say that I'm going to have a voice whenever I have a concern. And maybe when you were 12, you had a voice. Was there a moment back then when young Paul stood up and said to the teacher, "I've had enough"?
Megalomania did start at a very early age, I'll be honest with you. But more out of just despair and dyslexia, probably. You know, and just not really, you know, able to do anything else. I mean, from a very early age, I woke up hearing melodies in my head. I remember as a child at my grandparents, when I was, you know, my head was lower than the piano keys, and putting my hands up and pulling out tunes, even then, and wanting to know to play the piano, and then this really, I don't know, odd situation where my father was very musical and a frustrated musician and a great tenor, kind of kept me in the dark. It was a really odd thing, you know, and I'm still very frustrated. I'm still musically, I still fight with the, you know, with trying to get what I hear in my head down into a recording, and so a lot of our music is born out of frustration and a certain amount of rage that I suppose I bring to it. And I don't know where that rage comes from. When I'm feeling pious, I'd like to think it's a rage against injustice. But when I'm not so pious, it's probably just rage.
Bob Geldof and what you did with him many years ago, Live Aid, you played a big role in that. Was he a guy that sort of showed you the way, how to be effective?
Yeah, he still is. Bob Geldof is still one of the biggest influences in my life. Not just our poor hygiene and sartorial state of disrepair, but he's fierce, he's funny, and he went after what was right when a lot of politicians were ignoring Africa in the middle 80s. I got so caught up with it, I ended up in Africa. I went to work with my wife Ali in Africa for a month in Ethiopia, and we worked in a relief camp. It's this kind of shocking thing, you know. You see these, they look like concentration camps, but the barbed wire is to keep the people out, not in. It's shocking to see these. Ethiopian people are very beautiful, dignified people, tall, incredibly handsome. And to see them with their heads shaved and sitting with blankets around them, begging for food, and they still looked
noble.
Noble was just something that I'll never forget. And there were many other things that I swore I'd never forget that happened in that month. To see how cheap life was, and you know, I remember a man offering me his child, just saying, "Please, please, you take my son." because I know he won't live if I keep him. And there are moments like that you say you'll never forget, but you get back to your daily life, you get back to the chores, you get back to your passions, but something stayed with me.
When you went to Ethiopia, the time between that moment and then, of course, the Geldof Live Aid, which was about Africa, but then you decided one day to forgive the debts of the poorest of the poor. Do you remember the day you decided to do that? And that was a lonely and complicated campaign, wasn't it?
It's hard to explain the Jubilee campaign in a few sentences. But what I liked about it was essentially a very American idea. It was the idea of the right to start again, the right to begin again. Can we use the millennium as an opportunity to give countries the chance to begin again, to lose all their old debts, the debts that they themselves didn't even choose sometimes. There was just for, old Cold War reasons they were given money that they now, years and years later, had still to pay back, more than they were paying on education or health or food. They were paying these old debts back to the West. When I found that for every dollar in government aid to Africa coming from the West, they owed us 8. That sent me, and I knew that if I could just get the airtime, other people would agree. The moment, I can't remember, because these things, I mean, if you're in a band and you hear one of these, it's like you actually want to put it out of your head.
They certainly want it. The members of that band certainly want you to put it out of your head.
That's true. But, they share the same...
Sure they do.
They share the same... they have the same feelings. They just wish it wasn't so unhip, what I'm doing. They're like, being in a rock band, it's like, oh, God, who's he going to be in a photograph with next? It's like, how uncool. And I always say, but listen, it's as uncool for the politician. You've got to remember, it's a bad look for both of us. But they've been very good, the band, about it. U2's music has always been rooted in not just, the personal, but also the political and the spiritual. I think those three things are the three-chorded strand that makes our band. That's why I'm inspired by Bob Marley, who is the same, or Marvin Gaye, or Bob Dylan, there was that political side, that personal side, and the sexuality of it, the spirituality of it.
He's the real deal. I know him. He's the best.